The number that called 911 had been deactivated for 11 months. I've been a paramedic in central Pennsylvania for going on 14 years, Dauphin County. Mostly rural runs, some highway work off Route 322, the occasional bad night in Harrisburg proper. You do this job long enough, the calls start to blur. You remember the worst ones and the weirdest ones. Everything in the middle just becomes time you spent. The call came in on a Tuesday, third week of February, ice storm moving in from the west. We'd already run 2 fender benders off Interstate 81 and a chest pain that turned out to be panic. My partner that night was a guy named Doug, 13 years on the job himself, not much rattled Doug. Dispatch tagged it as an unresponsive subject. Residential address out on Cress Road, a 2-lane county road that dead ends into state game land, single caller. Said she found her neighbor unconscious on the front porch. Nothing about that call seemed strange, not yet. We got out there in about 9 minutes. Small ranch house, vinyl siding, one light on in the front room. 3 houses spaced far apart with tree lines between them, and the rest was dark. The kind of dark that sits on you in rural Pennsylvania in February, heavy and total. Our headlights cut across the frozen yard, and I could already see the porch was empty. No shape on the ground, no movement. Doug and I walked the perimeter. Nothing on the ground, nothing on the steps. The porch was dry. The cold had been sitting there all day, around 19 degrees, and the concrete had a thin skin of frost on it. Not ice, frost, the white kind that holds an impression. If someone had been lying on that concrete, the warmth of a body would have pressed a patch clear. There wasn't one. The frost was even and undisturbed from the door to the steps. I went back to the rig and asked dispatch to confirm the address. They confirmed it, and then they told me something I hadn't asked about. The call had come from a prepaid number. The carrier shut it off the previous March for non-payment. 11 months dormant, no reactivation on file. The call had still gone through. Doug looked at me over the roof of the ambulance. The yard was quiet. No wind yet, but you could smell the storm coming, that mineral cold that moves ahead of freezing rain, sharp and faintly metallic at the back of your throat. Neither of us said anything. We knocked on the front door anyway, because that's the job. You don't stand in a driveway talking about phone carriers. You knock. A woman answered, 50s maybe, housecoat. She looked at us the way people look when they've already forgotten they called, confused, a little irritated. I told her we'd gotten a call from this address about an unresponsive person. She said she hadn't called anyone. I asked if anyone else was in the house. She said no. She lived alone. She'd lived alone for 3 years since her husband passed. I asked her name just to have it. She said Margaret. I asked Margaret if she owned a prepaid cell phone. She thought about it, then she said her husband had one. She hadn't touched it since he died. She didn't even know where it was. The air went out of me a little right then, not dramatically, just a quiet drop, the way your stomach moves when something doesn't fit and you can't force it to fit. I kept my face neutral. That's also the job. You don't let what you're thinking show up on your face in someone's doorway. Doug asked if we could come in and look around, just to make sure everything was okay. She let us in. The house was warm and it smelled like soup. Onion, maybe barley, the smell of something that had been cooking for hours and was now sitting on a low burner. Normal, living room, small kitchen, a hallway, the furnace ticked. A television was on in the corner with the volume low, casting pale blue light across the carpet. Margaret followed us through it. At the end of the hall there was a closed door. I asked her what was back there. She said it was her husband's office. She kept it closed. She hadn't gone in since the funeral. I asked when that was. March, she said, last March. Doug and I looked at each other. I asked if we could open it. She got quiet, not suspicious quiet, sad quiet. She nodded and stayed in the hallway. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open slowly and reached in for the light switch. The room was small and the air in it was different, cooler, stiller. The way a room gets when it hasn't been occupied in a long time, and warmth from the rest of the house is only just starting to bleed under the door. It smelled faintly of old paper and something else I couldn't name. Not bad, just old, like the air had been sitting undisturbed for the better part of a year. A desk, a bookshelf, a filing cabinet, a few framed photos on the wall that I didn't look at closely. Normal enough. But the desk chair was pulled out and angled toward the door, like someone had just stood up from it, and on the desk, next to a dusty cup of pens, was a prepaid cell phone. I didn't touch it, I just looked at it. The screen was off. From where I was standing, I could see it was one of those old track phones, the kind you buy at a Walmart pharmacy counter, the kind you activate once and forget about. There was dust on the screen. a fine, even layer of it, the kind of accumulation that takes months. It had been sitting there a long time. I told Doug to stay with Margaret and stepped outside to call dispatch again. The cold hit me hard. The wind had picked up from the west, the leading edge of the storm, and I could hear it moving through the trees at the edge of the property. A low sound, slow and continuous. I stood by the rig on Cress Road and asked dispatch to read me the exact number the call had come from. They did. I wrote it down on my glove with a marker, the way I do when I don't want to lose something. I went back inside and asked Margaret if I could see the phone. She pointed at it like it might bite her. I put on a glove and turned it over. There was a sticker on the back, his name and the phone number written in his handwriting. She said he always did that, labeled everything. The number matched. I've thought about what went through my head in that moment because I've come back to it 100 times since. I didn't believe in anything supernatural. I still don't, not exactly. But I stood in that room, in that cold, in the smell of old paper and undisturbed air, and I could not put together an explanation that held. The chair pulled out from the desk, the phone with its even coat of dust, the number on the sticker matching the number on my glove. The phone was dead, carrier confirmed, no reactivation, no one had used it. And yet, I photographed the phone, the sticker, the room. I got the chair and the frame too, the way it was angled toward the door. I don't know exactly why I photographed the chair. It just seemed important to have a record of how things were positioned. I called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's office and had them send a deputy. Not because I thought a crime had occurred. I didn't know what I thought. The deputy was a younger guy named Tors. He took one look at the situation and got that same blank expression Doug had, the one that means you're running out of normal explanations, and you know it and you're trying to look like you aren't. Tors bagged the phone. He said he'd have someone pull the carrier data, see if there was a technical explanation. A ghost signal, a routing error, something. Margaret sat at her kitchen table through all of this and drank tea. She wasn't scared. She seemed more tired than anything. At one point I looked down the hallway and she was just sitting there with both hands around the mug, staring at nothing. I thought about what it must feel like to have strangers walking through your husband's office in the middle of the night while a storm moves in outside. I didn't ask her how she was doing. Sometimes the question is worse than the silence. I stayed past the end of my shift. Doug headed out around midnight when relief came. I sat in the driveway for a while. I don't know what I was waiting for. Nothing happened. The ice storm rolled in around 1 in the morning, freezing rain first, then sleet, ticking against the windshield like something trying to get in. I drove back up 322 with the roads going slick under me and the county salt trucks already working the highway in the distance, their amber lights strobing through the weather. The follow-up came about 3 weeks later. Tors called me. He didn't have to do that. He said the carrier had pulled every record they had on the number. The phone had not been activated. No tower had logged a connection from it. No call had been initiated from that device. And yet the 911 system had a record of the incoming call, a timestamp, a duration, 47 seconds, and a partial recording of someone breathing. Just breathing, no words, not distressed breathing, not the sound of someone in pain, just slow, even respiration. The kind of sound a person makes when they're sitting still in a quiet room. The state police got involved briefly. They couldn't explain it either. Eventually it got filed under technical anomaly and no one pushed it further. No crime, no victim, no perpetrator, just a record of a call from a dead phone. I've looked into it myself over the years. Carrier errors happen. 911 routing runs on infrastructure older than most people think. There are edge cases. I've read about them. None of those edge cases involve a deactivated prepaid with a dead battery and no SIM activity generating a 47-second call with audio. I don't know what Margaret made of it. I thought about her a lot in the weeks after, whether she found it comforting or whether it just picked the scab open again. I didn't go back to find out. That didn't feel like my place. What I do know is this: I answer every call the same way I always have. You get a dispatch, you run the call, you treat what you find. You don't get to decide something is impossible before you've walked through the door. I learned that early. But sometimes on slow nights, when a call comes in and the address is somewhere out on a rural road and the story doesn't quite line up, I take an extra second before I knock. I don't know what I'm listening for, I just take the second. There are calls that stay with you. That was one of mine. The keychain was sitting on my pillow when I came back from the shower. I know how that sounds. I know you're already building an explanation. I built the same ones, but the keychain was only the end of it. Everything else started the moment I turned off Route 7 and lost every bar of signal I had. My name is Daniel. I was 31 that summer. I'd been doing remote IT work for a company out of Pittsburgh, and after 8 months staring at the same apartment walls, I needed a week somewhere quiet, real quiet. A friend had mentioned the Ozarks. I found a cabin rental, not Airbnb, but works the same way. 4 nights minimum, full kitchen, wraparound porch, 5 acres of timber. The host's name was Earl. I drove down from Pittsburgh in my Tacoma, I west out of Columbus, then south through Missouri. The last town with anything resembling a main street was a place called Gainesville. I stopped at a Casey's General Store to gas up and grab a sandwich. The woman at the register looked at my Pittsburgh Pirates cap and asked where I was headed. I told her. She nodded once and didn't say anything else. That was a Thursday afternoon, overcast, August heat that doesn't break even when the sun goes behind clouds. By the time I found the county road, unmarked, just a rusted post with the number 419 stenciled in faded white paint, my phone had gone to 1 bar and then nothing. The cabin itself was fine, better than fine. Wood floors, a stone fireplace, a porch looking out over a creek. Earl had left a lockbox key and a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. The top of the note was the usual stuff: trash day, how to work the water heater, who to call if the propane ran out, but at the bottom, underlined twice, it said, don't use the fire road past the second gate after dark. Don't go into the lower field after 9. If you hear dogs, stay inside. I read it twice. I told myself it was liability language. Hunters used that land. Wild dogs wandered through. It was fine. I made a sandwich, sat on the porch, and watched the tree line across the creek go from green to gray as the sun dropped. The creek made a low, steady sound. The air smelled like damp bark and something faintly metallic I couldn't name. Minerals in the water, I told myself, just the soil. The first night, nothing happened. The second morning, I drove back to Gainesville for supplies. On the way back, I passed a white Ford F-250 parked on the shoulder of County Road 419. Engine running, I could see the exhaust. Windows tinted dark enough that I couldn't make out anyone inside. I pulled into the cabin's gravel drive and checked my rear view. The truck hadn't moved. It was gone when I looked again 10 minutes later. That afternoon, I walked the property. I found the first gate Earl had mentioned, a cattle gate at the end of a rutted track heading south. About 200 yards past it, just visible through the scrub, was a second gate with a brand new padlock on it, bright silver, barely been outside, completely out of place against the weathered timber and rusted hinges around it. I didn't go past it. I didn't know why I listened. I just did. Around 7 that evening, a man came walking up the gravel drive, maybe 50, canvas work pants, flannel with the sleeves cut off. He stopped about 20 feet from the porch steps and stood there. The look on his face was patient, like he had nowhere else he needed to be. Help you, I said. Just checking in, he said. I'm Harlan. My property backs up to the east side of this one. I told him my name. He nodded like he already knew it. Then he asked if Earl had mentioned anything to me. I said the note covered the basics. He looked past me at the front door, then back at me. You hear anything tonight, he said. Just leave it alone. Then he walked back down the drive and into the tree line on the other side of the road, not toward the road, into the trees. I stood on that porch and waited for the sound of branches, footsteps on leaves, anything. There was nothing, just the creek. I should have packed that night, I know that now. Instead, I locked the doors, checked the windows, and told myself rural neighbors were just different. Blunt, looking out for each other's property, not threatening, just a different way of living. I called my buddy Marcus from the one spot on the property with half a bar, a flat rock near the creek's east bank, 30 yards from the cabin's back door. I told him about the note and about Harlan. Marcus laughed, said I was a city kid who couldn't handle a little country. I almost believed him. The third day was quiet. I hiked along the creek. I grilled on the porch. I didn't see the white F-250. I didn't see Harlan. Around 10 that night, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the window first. A woman I didn't recognize, 40s maybe, brown coat. She was holding something, but I couldn't make out what. I cracked the door. She said her car had broken down on the county road. Her phone was dead. She needed to use mine. Her voice was calm. Too calm for someone who'd walked half a mile in the dark to a stranger's door. No sweat on her face, no mud on her shoes. The temperature had dropped into the low 60s and she wasn't hugging herself against the cold at all. She just stood there on my porch steps with her hands at her sides, and the porch light caught her face at an angle that made her expression impossible to read as anything other than waiting. I told her I barely had signal, but I'd try to call someone for her. She said that was fine, and then she said, Earl usually lets folks in. I went cold. I hadn't told her where I was staying. The cabin had no visible signage. There was no way she knew Earl's name unless she knew this specific property. I told her I'd call from inside and get her some help. I closed the door, I locked it. I stood with my back against it for a full minute, not moving, just listening. I couldn't hear her on the porch, no footsteps, no shifting weight, no small sounds that people make when they're standing somewhere waiting. The silence on the other side of that door was complete. When I looked through the window again, she was gone. No flashlight moving down the drive, nothing. I didn't sleep. I sat in the wooden chair in the corner of the main room with every light on, watching the windows go from black to gray as the hours moved. Around 3 in the morning, I thought I heard something cross the gravel drive outside, not heavy. A soft, deliberate crunch, then silence. I didn't go to the window. I sat very still and waited until it didn't come again. At 6 in the morning, I decided to shower before packing up. The bathroom had no window. I was in there maybe 8 minutes. When I came back to the bedroom, the keychain was on my pillow. A plain metal ring, 2 keys, a small laminated tag with a name on it, not my name, not Earl's, just a man's first name in blue marker, the handwriting careful and deliberate, like someone who'd taken their time with it. The keys looked like house keys, ordinary hardware store cuts. The only thing unusual about them was that they had no business being in a locked cabin on my pillow. The metal was cold when I picked it up, not room temperature, cold like it had come from outside. Someone had been inside that cabin while I was in the shower. My doors were locked, the windows were latched. I had checked every one of them before I got in. I didn't stop to figure out how. I didn't look for a note. I grabbed my bag, shoved everything in loose, and carried it to the Tacoma in one trip. I left the cabin key in the lockbox. I left the keychain on the kitchen counter. I did not look back at the tree line. The white F-250 was on County Road 419 again. Same spot. Engine idling, a thin thread of exhaust rising straight up in the still morning air. The driver's window was down now. I turned north and drove past it at 40 miles an hour. In my peripheral vision, I could see the open window. I didn't turn to look. I put the Tacoma on the center line and I drove. I stopped for coffee at a McDonald's in West Plains once I had enough signal to breathe. My hands were shaking when I took the cup. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes before I could get back on the road. I left a review for the cabin. I was careful with it. I said the property wasn't what I expected and that I'd had an uncomfortable interaction with a neighbor. The review stayed up for about 2 weeks, then it was gone. The listing itself disappeared a month after that. I searched for Earl's name and found nothing. 6 months later, Marcus sent me a link. The Ozark County Sheriff's Office had announced an investigation into a property used for trespassing and criminal surveillance. No names, no details. The article was 4 sentences long. I don't know what was past that second gate. I don't know who the woman was or how anyone got into that cabin. I don't know whose name was on that laminated tag or whether they made it back to wherever they were trying to go. What I know is that someone wanted me to understand they could get in. That was the whole point, not to take anything, not to hurt me, just to make sure I understood the locks didn't matter. Some places the isolation isn't the selling point. It's the whole plan. On the night I came home and found my back door unlocked, I knew I'd been right for months. My name is Cal. I was 31 at the time, working maintenance shifts at a manufacturing plant outside Youngstown, Ohio. I owned a small 2-bedroom on Trumbull Street, working-class neighborhood, older houses, people who kept to themselves. I'd lived there about 2 years when this started. I'm not the paranoid type. I tell you that because everything that follows is going to sound like I was building a case out of nothing. I wasn't. The first thing I noticed was a car, a late-model Dodge Charger, dark blue, no front plate. It parked on the opposite side of Trumbull, about 4 houses down, facing my direction. I saw it on a Tuesday evening in early October when I got back from a double shift, already past 8, temperature dropping fast the way it does in northern Ohio once September is gone. The Charger was still there when I went to bed around 11. I stood at my bedroom window looking down the street at it, engine off. Nobody getting out, just sitting there. I thought someone was visiting a neighbor. I went asleep. I saw it again the following Thursday. Same spot, same angle. There was a shape in the driver's seat still. I stood on my front step for probably 30 seconds, keys in my hand, watching it the way you watch something you're not sure is moving. It wasn't moving. I went inside. I told myself it was nothing. The second thing happened about 2 weeks later. I'd ordered a new router online. The box was on my front step when I got home, but it had been opened. The tape was slit clean across the top, not torn, not peeled, slit with something sharp. The router was still inside, everything accounted for, but the box had been resealed with regular clear tape, the kind you'd pick up at a Dollar General. Whoever did it hadn't even tried to match the original seal. I stood on my porch holding it. The street was quiet. My porch light buzzed faintly. It does that when the temperature gets below 40. I went inside and set the box on the kitchen table and stared at it. I checked with my neighbor Dennis, a retired guy across the street who kept odd hours and watched the block. He said he hadn't seen anyone at my step, but he mentioned he'd seen a man walking the sidewalk on the south side of Trumbull 2 evenings that week. Slow walk, stopping sometimes. Dennis didn't recognize him from the neighborhood. Medium height, dark jacket, moving like he wasn't going anywhere in particular. I filed that away. A month passed, November, cold and gray the way northern Ohio gets before the first snow. I changed my routine a little, earlier shifts, different parking habits. I started leaving my truck at the far end of the driveway instead of pulling up to the garage just so I had a better sightline to the street when I climbed out. Nothing dramatic, I just started paying attention. Then my coworker Marcus pulled me aside at the plant. A man had called the main line asking for me by first and last name. He wanted to know what shift I worked. He told the front desk he was a relative. I don't have family in Ohio, Marcus knew that. I drove home that night gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached by the time I pulled onto Trumbull. The following week I found a box on my front porch, cardboard about the size of a shoebox taped shut. My name was written on top in black marker, Cal Meredith, not printed, written by hand, block letters, neat and deliberate, no return address, no postage, it hadn't come through the mail. I stood there looking at it, the porch light was on. The street behind me was empty. The air smelled like wood smoke from somewhere down the block. I put on gloves, brought the box inside, and cut it open. There was a framed photograph inside. It was me walking from my truck, my gray F-150, to the front door of my own house, taken from the street, maybe 40 feet away. I was wearing my dark green Carhartt work jacket. I didn't know when it was taken, but I recognized the angle immediately. It was from roughly where the Charger always parked. I went cold. Not figuratively, the kind of cold that starts in your chest and moves outward. Your hands feel distant, your breathing gets shallow. I set the photograph on the kitchen table. I took a step back from it. I stood there looking at my own face in a frame that someone had carried to my porch and left without knocking, without a note, without any message other than the fact of it. The fact that he had been out there, watching, and he wanted me to know it. I sat at that table for a long time. I didn't eat, didn't turn the TV on. The photograph was face down in front of me. The gloves were still on my hands. The refrigerator hummed. The wind pressed against the windows. And I could hear the chain on my back fence tapping against the post the way it always did when the wind picked up. A sound I'd heard 100 times before. That night it was the worst sound in the world. I called the Youngstown Police Department. A detective named Rains took a report. I had the photograph, the box, my name written on it in block letters, and the call to my workplace. He didn't dismiss me, he just didn't have enough yet. I understood that. It still scared me. I called a locksmith the next morning. New deadbolts on the front door, the back door, and the side entry from the garage. 3 different keys. I bought a camera system, 4 cameras, 1 on each corner of the house, 1 aimed at the driveway. I installed them myself over 2 days in the cold, drilling through the eaves with my hands going numb. Motion alerts sent straight to my phone. I also called my friend Ray. He came and stayed for 9 days. Ray works construction, doesn't rattle easy. Just having another person in the house, hearing someone move around in the kitchen, seeing another pair of boots by the front door, helped me think straight in a way I hadn't managed on my own. On the 6th night Ray was there, the back camera caught something at 2:17 in the morning. A man stepped out of the gap between my back fence and the neighbor's storage shed. He came through the unlatched section of chain link, pushed it open quietly, and walked to the center of my yard. He stood there for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, weight back slightly, hands at his sides, face tilted up toward the house, not moving, not looking around, just looking at the windows, at the place where I was sleeping 12 feet above him, with no idea he was there. Then he walked back the way he came, eased through the fence, and was gone. I watched that footage at 6 in the morning with Ray standing behind me. Neither of us said anything for a while. The camera quality wasn't perfect, but his face was partially visible on one of the frames. Detective Rains said they'd run it. 3 days later, they had a name. He was 38 years old. He had a prior from a county 2 hours south, a stalking case involving a woman he'd worked with. He served a short sentence and relocated north. Rains couldn't share much more than that, but he told me they had him on the yard footage and could connect him to my property. He was arrested on a Wednesday morning. I was at work when Rains called. I had to sit down on a parts crate in the middle of the plant floor and just breathe for a minute while the machines ran around me. The prosecutor filed felony stalking charges. He pled guilty 6 months later to a reduced count, 2 years of probation, and a restraining order covering me and my property. He's not allowed within 500 feet of Trumbull Street. I stayed in that house. I almost moved, but I decided I'd done nothing wrong and I wasn't going to let him take my house from me too. The cameras are still up. I still check the alerts. I lock the second deadbolt every night without thinking about it now. It's muscle memory. Sometimes I still hear the chain on the back fence tapping in the wind, and for just a second before I'm fully awake, my stomach drops. Then I remember the footage is running, the bolts are thrown, and I let myself go back to sleep. What I keep coming back to is how long I told myself I was imagining it. The car, the opened package, the slow walk Dennis saw, every one of those things was real. Every one of them was a sign. I needed all of them before I trusted what I already knew. Don't talk yourself out of what you already know.